Hey guys, Weiss here. Welcome to another video. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. It is super helpful. Today we are celebrating the 40th anniversary of the mighty ColecoVision, my favorite retro gaming console of all time. Absolutely love this system, and I've been playing it on a pretty regular basis for almost 40 years. As many of you know, I got my console back in Christmas of 1982. Absolutely blew my mind, changed my life forever, and made me a video game collector for life. Love this console, and I thought I would do something a little different today to celebrate the console. I picked out 10 random games from my collection just to talk about some of my memories with the games, some things I like about the games, how I acquired them, that kind of thing. Just random, unscripted, just thought I would have some fun celebrating this amazing, amazing console that was just so life-altering for so many of us back in the day. Just a great console. And you guys know I'm a huge ColecoVision fan. Many of you know that I wrote the world's first guide to the ColecoVision. Every single game for that console, all the original titles, have write-ups in this book, which came out in 2007. And I was the writer and editor on ColecoVision's Volume 1, Number 1. Opcode brought back ColecoVision magazines, or at least a zine. Pretty cool stuff, and that was a lot of fun to work on. All right, guys, let's get to it. Just memories and just some cool stuff about 10 games that I got back in the day and that I still enjoy playing today. James Bond 007. I thought Parker Brothers did some really solid work for the ColecoVision as a third-party publisher for the console. And James Bond 007, I picked it up pretty quickly when it came out because I was buying just about everything for the ColecoVision as it came out, as I could afford it. I love the console, obviously. And James Bond 007, I wasn't a huge James Bond fan, and I'm still not, although I like the series and I get around to seeing the movies. You know, I've seen most of them and I like them, but I'm not a hardcore Bond fan or anything. But I did want to get this game because it plays a little bit, or quite a bit, like Moon Patrol. It's not as dynamic or as great as Moon Patrol, but it is a fun game, and I still do enjoy it from time to time. Pretty cool game, and it does pay homage to several James Bond films. Pretty cool stuff. Solid game for the ColecoVision. Next up is Root Beer Tapper. Now, this is one of those ColecoVision games I didn't get till later. I picked it up sometime in the early 2000s. I think I got it on eBay. It's a gorgeous copy of the game. It was cartridge only, but I did get it for a solid price before it had gone up so much. It's kind of a hard to find game today, and this is one of those games for the ColecoVision that I played back in the day, and then I played it perfectly emulated on the PlayStation. And I like the ColecoVision version, and it's solid, and I thought they did a pretty good job with it, considering it's a fairly elaborate game for an early 80s title. It's a solid port. It's not as accurate as something like Ladybug or Mousetrap, but it is good. And I do typically, when I want to play some Tapper, I typically play the coin-op version. I do like having the game in my collection because it is hard to find today, and I do break it out from time to time, even though it is not one of the better ports for the ColecoVision as far as just in terms of accuracy, but it is solid. Next up is Omega Race. Now, this is an interesting shooter for the ColecoVision because it's two-player simultaneous shooter, which is unusual for the console, and it also has some features that are not available in the arcade version. It has some original features for the console, and it's compatible with the ColecoVision roller controller. Pretty cool little shooter. It's got some asteroids elements to it, but you can also bounce off the walls. It's an unusual shooter for the ColecoVision, like I said, because it's two-player simultaneous. And one night when I went out with this girl, we went out to the movies and did the usual dating thing. We came back to my place, and I thought it would be fun to play some two-player Omega Race. She didn't think so. She thought it was pretty stupid and boring. Needless to say, we didn't date for that much longer. There were some other things we just didn't have much in common with either. So anyway, Omega Race, solid. Pretty cool game for the ColecoVision. And I love when home versions of arcade games have new features on them. That's pretty awesome. Next up is Jungle Hunt. Again, just some random things about these games. randomly chosen just a little while ago. Now, Jungle Hunt, this is one hard game to find today. It was created for the ColecoVision late in the life of the console, and I thought it was so cool and so mind-blowing when Atari started making games for the ColecoVision, and these weren't as common as those early ColecoVision titles or the Parker Brothers titles for the ColecoVision. You just didn't see the Atari soft games as often. Centipede and Defender were pretty common, but Jungle Hunt and Galaxian, hard to find. And I'm really proud of Jungle Hunt because it's an excellent port of a great arcade game. One of the more accurate third-party ports for the ColecoVision, and I love having it in the collection. And I bought it at Toys R Us when it came out. I think I paid $30 for it, brand new. And I'm glad I picked it up because it's hard to find now. Glad I have it in my collection. Beam Rider from Activision. This game does not get enough love in my opinion. I do see people mention it from time to time, but it just doesn't show up that often on best of lists or whatever, but it's an excellent shooter for the console. Kind of like Galaga or Space Invaders or something like that, but you adhere to these beams. You don't scroll smoothly back and forth, as you guide your ship. You go from beam to beam, which makes it different, which makes it interesting. And the shooting mechanism is a little different if you check it out. You've got to play Beam Rider. If you've only played it on the Atari 2600, check out the ColecoVision version. The graphics have been upgraded. It's got some other differences as well. Pretty cool Beam Rider for the ColecoVision. It's actually one of my favorite Activision games for the console because they did a great job on it. Interesting shooter. Next up is Slurpy. This is an oddball action game from Zonix, the notorious publisher that did things like It's Only Rock and Roll, and not the best publisher in the world. They have some really wheels-off games. The most interesting thing to me about this game from a personal standpoint is I bought it for 50 cents from Half Price Books. You guys, a lot of you know that Half Price Books is a used book chain. There's a lot of stores in Texas, but there's a few stores in other states as well. They do carry video games, and they have been carrying video games for a long time. A lot of you game chasers know that they used to not worry so much about the prices of their video games. They wouldn't look them up on eBay. They didn't really seem to realize that video games had value. Up until maybe 2000, 10 or 11 or 12, I don't even remember. Slurpy I picked up probably around this time somewhere. I probably had it for 10 years or so, 10 or 12 years. And I got it for 50 cents from Half Price Books, and it's the last time I can remember buying a video game from Half Price Books where they just threw it out there and completely didn't care what the price it was. They didn't care to look it up or anything like that. Nowadays, and over the last decade or so, Half Price Books will look up their video games, and a lot of times they'll put them, they're definitely not half price games. They're half price books. Most of their books are half price or less, but their games they typically put out for, just what you might find them on eBay or at conventions or sometimes higher. But Slurpy is the last really good deal I remember getting at half price that wasn't a mistake on their part. Every once in a while they'll misprice something, like they'll, like Flintstones Surprise at Dinosaur Peak. They might think it's the other Flintstones game or something. That's just a hypothetical. I've seen things mismarked before. But Slurpy is the last thing I remember getting at half price, the last video game I remember getting at half price, when they would just throw stuff out and not care. They would just mark them whatever, $2, $3, $4, $5 a piece. They really were pretty wheels off years ago on their pricing of video games, when you could just get a lot of things for super cheap. It was almost like buying games at a thrift store. So Slurpy, 50 cents. It's a hard to find game today and pretty pricey, so that's awesome. Next up is Tutankhamun. By Parker Brothers. Parker Brothers was a solid third-party company for the ColecoVision, and I played Tutankhamun so many times because I love maze games. It's a maze shooter. Now, yeah, the scrolling is very choppy, and I even knew this back in the day, even though I'd never played Tutankhamun in the arcades before when I got this for the ColecoVision in the early 80s when it first came out. But I just love the game anyway. It's a fantastic, challenging maze shooter with adventure elements. I hadn't played the arcade version back in the day, but I played it years later, probably around in the early 2000s. My local arcades didn't have Tutankhamun, so I played it later in the early 2000s, and I realized, wow, the ColecoVision port wasn't great. It had so much better scrolling in the arcade, very smooth, very slick, much, quite a bit better graphics, but still Tutankhamun, it looks good, plays well despite the choppy scrolling. And it's still a game I enjoy today when I can't get to the arcades for this game, because like the local free plays, I haven't seen this game in a while at my local free plays, and it's been a while since I've had access to this game in an arcade. Haven't seen it at a retro gaming convention recently, so I definitely pull out the ColecoVision version from time to time. Next up is Star Trek Strategic Operations Simulator. Now, I am a hardcore Star Trek fan, as many of you know, and this is a solid game. It's fun, but the strangest memory I have of this game is, so this isn't my original copy. I got mine back in the early 80s, like so much of my ColecoVision collection, or early to mid 80s. And I had this game and the overlays and the instruction manual. And I had thrown away the box, unfortunately, but I had this game, and I wasn't, at the time, this was around 80, I don't know, sometime in the late 80s, I decided I didn't play Star Trek much anymore, and I would sell it. This was before, I guess I knew I needed to have every ColecoVision game, and I took it to a Dallas Fantasy Fair, a comic book convention. This was long before the melding of video games and comic books at conventions. When you would go to your average Comic Con in the 80s, you would not see video games there. You might see an Atari from time to time, but very likely not. I don't ever remember seeing any video games at any of these Dallas Fantasy Fairs. But I took Star Trek around to some different vendors just to try to sell it, just to get a few extra dollars. And and most people just looked at me weird. What is this? I don't need this. Someone finally paid me $7 for it. I sold the cartridge, the manual, and the overlays for $7. I remember I had them in a Ziploc bag. And I'm sure they just threw it out on the table for 20 or whatever. Maybe they sold it, maybe they didn't, who knows. I'm sure they sold it at some point. But anyway, of course, a little later on, when I was much more of a completist and a really hardcore collector, I went back and rebought a copy of Star Trek. And so now I do have it in my collection. So anyway, one of the missteps in retro game collecting was getting rid of that, but at least I have it back. Next up is War Room. This is an interesting game to me because this is the first game I recall seeing below retail price in the newspaper. Every Sunday, I would scour the newspaper for the ads, the Sunday circulars, as they would call them, these full color ads for different stores around, and I was flipping through the Sears ad in the Sunday paper. Back in the day, the Sunday paper was massive, and one reason it was so big is because it had tons of ads. Long before the internet, this is where people found their bargains. And so I would go through every Sunday morning, and I would look through to see if I could find, video games for cheap on sale. And War Room's the first one I remember seeing marked down. The first ColecoVision game I remember seeing marked down, and it was marked down from the original price of $30 down to $23, $7 off. So I got in my car, rushed out to Sears on the Sunday afternoon, and bought War Room for $23, and I did enjoy it quite a bit. Pretty cool game. It's pretty intricate. It's one of these games that requires you to read the instruction manual to find out what is going on, and I did enjoy it a lot. I think it's an interesting game from an oddball publisher. War Room published a Probe 2000 video game, and there were supposed to be more of these Probe 2000 games for the ColecoVision. Unfortunately, that was the only one. Next up, Cabbage Patch Kids Adventures in the Park for ColecoVision and Atom. Man, Adventures in the Park. I bought this based on the fact that I loved ColecoVision, and not much more, other than the fact that it actually plays like Pitfall. Yes, Pitfall. Believe it or not, Cabbage Patch Adventures in the Park plays a lot like Pitfall. It's a platformer. You run, you jump, you swing on vines. You just happen to be playing as a Cabbage Patch doll. Pretty cool, huh? Pretty weird. Even if you're a manly stud, A true He-Man, a brute. You should play Cabbage Patch Adventures in the Park. I will not take your man card away because it is a truly awesome game. All right, guys, let me know in the comments what you think of some of these games. Tell me your favorite of these 10 games. That would be awesome. I would love that. And also share your ColecoVision memories. Did you get a ColecoVision back in 1982? Have you been playing ColecoVision for 40 years? If not, when did you get your ColecoVision? When did you first play it? Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for liking this video. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. I would greatly appreciate it. And just thanks for being you. Happy 40th anniversary to the ColecoVision.
It's me, Mario!